All right, so we're going back to the story of Abraham as pointed there by Tertullian, by Martin Luther, and by Kierkegaard. And Kierkegaard wants in the 19th century, in the 1800s, to save faith by pointing us back to what he takes to be the fundamental, true epistemological story as captured in Scripture. Now, the story of Abraham, of course, we'll do the short version here. It starts with Abraham being an elderly man, getting on in years, and married to Sarah, who's also getting elderly. And one of the great sorrows of Abraham's life is that he and Sarah have not had a child together. It's thought that Sarah was the one who was barren here. Abraham had fathered a child with one of his slave women, Hagar. She bore him a son named Ishmael, but the woman to whom he was legally married, Sarah, was unable to conceive, and so they were quite distraught with this. Now, as the story goes, he receives a message from God that he should not despair about this issue, that in fact Sarah is going to become pregnant, she will give birth to a son, and through that son, the message from God says is that Abraham will become the father of a mighty nation with a multitude of people, right, and so forth. Now, Abraham is moderately skeptical here, so he's not sure that this is actually going to happen. But the point I want to put on the board here, first off, is that from Abraham's perspective, right, there's a particular relationship that he is now entering into with God as a result of this communication that he has received from God. As it happens, Sarah does become pregnant. She does give birth to a son. They name the son Isaac, and he grows up to be a youth. And Abraham, in return for his obedience to God, is in his covenant position of now being at the head of what he thinks will be a great and mighty nation in the future here. All right, fast forward. Next part of the story is Abraham receives another message from God, this one much more disturbing. God communicates to him that he wants to take his now young son, who's a youth, Isaac, to the top of Mount Moriah and offer him as a sacrifice. So in effect, God is asking Abraham to kill his son, his unexpected son. Okay, so that's the bare bones of the story here. We get to this point in the story. Kierkegaard asks us to pause. Luther asks us to pause and reflect on Abraham's circumstance. If we really want to understand faith, we have to put ourselves in Abraham's sandals, right, so to speak, and understand his torment, that of what is being asked here compared to and in conflict with everything that he thinks is going to happen with the future of his life and destiny and family in this particular case. All right, night is falling. You've received this message that you are in the next morning to take your son Isaac to a sacrificial place and offer him as a sacrifice, that is to say, kill him. What goes on in one's mind in a circumstance like this if you are Abraham? Well, as Kierkegaard puts it, Abraham was no doubt in torment. Luther says the same thing. There is no doubt that faith and reason and everything in Abraham's mind fell out mightily, that he was a man in trouble psychologically that evening. One of the things, of course, that is going to be first on his mind is this issue of the covenant. And a natural question that is going to arise in his mind, is a reasonable question, is to say, well, I have this covenant here. If I go ahead and kill Isaac, then the consequence of that is that the covenant is broken. Isaac is a youth. He has not yet fathered children himself. It will then no longer be possible for me to be the father of a mighty nation. And so the covenant is no longer valid. But, and here's the rational question to ask at this point, when God made this covenant with me, he's also an all-knowing being. He presumably knew that at some point down the road he's going to ask me to do this, and that the logical consequence of doing this is that the covenant is going to be broken. So what I have here is a contradiction, right? I'm being asked to do something that does not fit with something that God has promised me before. And so this then means that there's a possibility that God the guy who made this promise to me is a liar. He was just fooling around in some respect at this point here, and wants me now to do something that is going to make null and void a promise that he has made before. Okay, that's a reasonable question. It's going to come up in a human being's mind. But it's worse than this for Abraham, because Isaac is somebody whom he cares about, and he also knows Isaac personally, and he knows that Isaac, for example, is an innocent youth. I'm sure Isaac has done things that boys typically do, but probably nothing that deserves the death penalty. And while this is before the Ten Commandments, it's not that much of a leap of logic to figure out that justice is not served by killing innocent people for no good reason. And so, again, I've got a problem here. If Isaac is innocent and I go ahead and I kill Isaac, then I'm killing an innocent person. I might be participating in an injustice. What makes this the right thing to do, to kill this particular innocent person? And so if God, though, is asking me to kill an innocent person, this raises then a reasonable question. Is God unjust? Is he someone who doesn't actually care about the lives of innocent people and making sure that the guilty are punished and those that are not guilty are not punished? Reasonable question. But it's even worse for Abraham because Isaac is his son with Sarah. And so God is asking him to kill his son. And if there's anything worse to a parent than the prospect or the reality of losing one's own child, I don't know what it is. So we're in this situation here of Isaac being a son of Abraham, and if I kill him, that is just going to be the worst possible anguish that I can inflict upon myself. It's not just that my son died, which would be tragic enough to me as a parent, but if I'm to be the agent, that's going to add a whole other level of torment to my life, and certainly my relationship with my wife Sarah, who is also going to be in anguish, and she's going to know that I am the agent who is causing her this anguish. Now we then say, well, clearly God is asking some sort of for a test here, right, of Abraham. But the natural and reasonable question to raise here is to say, if this is some sort of a test, what kind of a being would put somebody through a test like this? And so this raises the question, is God some sort of sadist, right, where he's devising tortures and torments for people for whatever test-worthy kinds of purposes here? All right, the point is that all of these are reasonable questions. Okay. We have a logical inconsistency, right? We have various trains of thought that we're developing logically here that raise various reasonable questions. So we're using logic and reason to think through this matter here. And I'm emphasizing the words logic and reason because that's exactly the issue that's at stake theologically here.